Mhm.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. My name is Davith Wood. I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location, and it's a real pleasure. This is one of our most popular events, and a few things to note, though, before we get started, and I hand things over to our presenters. We are, as Zoom tells you when you come in, recording this event for posterity on our YouTube channel, but don't worry. Only those of us who are unmuted and speaking in the yellow box will be on there. So if you have any questions at any point or any comments, feel free to use the chat box and type those in. Another note is one thing that we are trying to suggest to all of our customers is that it is we've already had to delay a couple of, I've seen already a couple of delayed publication dates for event books. So we are recommending, as we did last year, to shop local and shop early and get your holiday shopping done early on. All right, well, let's get started. And first up, we have Cathy Taylor, a bookseller from our Manchester location. The other important thing before Cathy is all of the books tonight are on the blog. I'm gonna enter it here. Okay. I'm distracted. I don't have Rachel here. It's Yom Kippur. I'm not on my game. All right. So anyway, all of the books featured tonight will be on the in the blog post there on the chat. You can find it at the link or in the notes from the Shires on the YouTube menu, on the menu of our website. All right. Well, go ahead. All right, Cathy, tell us about what you've been reading.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Cathy. So the first book I'm going to talk to you about today is No One is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. It was recently shortlisted for the Booker Prize, if any of you care about that. But it is, I believe, her debut novel. She got her start as a poet, specifically a poet on Twitter. And she was one of the first to really use like the medium of Twitter really creatively and successfully. So this is her debut novel, and it does not shockingly have to do with social media and the internet and the way that sort of infiltrates our lives. And as anyone who has ever used social media knows, the more you use it, the more it begins to infect your everyday existence. So it's from the perspective of a nameless narrator who you have to assume is at least partially based on Patricia Lockwood. It sort of blends the narrator and the author, and I kind of like books like that. If you've ever read like Rachel Cusk or Ben Lerner at all, it's sort of in that vein. So it's split into two parts. The first part really focuses on this place called The Portal, which is Patricia Lockwood's name for the internet. And it's where our narrator makes her living as a writer. It's ever shifting, reference bouncing, tunnel visiony, really fun and disorienting. So the portal is a virtual realm that infiltrates her thoughts and fears and language and her dreams. And Patricia Lockwood definitely shows all the maddening ways that memes and GIFs and tweets and TikToks shape our consciousness. It's worth noting that the first part has not a lot of narrative, and you may be wondering why you're there and where you're headed, which is, to me, how being on the internet feels a lot of the time. So that part's really, really good. But the second part, I think, is where Patricia Lockwood's talent really shines. And that one has a bit more plot. It focuses on a tragedy that occurs in her family. Her newborn niece is diagnosed with a severe case of Proteus syndrome, which is always fatal. And so her family is trying to figure out how to cope with that. And she in particular is figuring out how to care for her niece in the best way she can. And it's really about death and love, and her focus, which had previously ricocheted between the constant updates and threads of the portal, how that is wholly absorbed by this baby and who she adores during her brief time alive. And so the second part really shows how love and death and the eternal questions of life have a way of tearing holes in our everyday existences, and their effect on the portal is really, or the internet is to dim it, to put it in perspective. So I think her achievement is really, again, this is what it looks like, creating a book about what it means to live today and about what is meaningful in a world where nothing is constant and we have so many superficial distractions in our lives. But she's so smart. It's really good. That's all I have to say. And it's not very long. I like books that aren't very long too. So that was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Okay. And the second book I'm going to talk about is another novel. I'm only talking about novels today, called The Life of the Mind by Christine Smallwood, if I can get that all in there. So this is another novel without much of a plot. And if you know me, I love novels with as little plot as possible and really intelligent narrators. So our narrator is a woman in her 30s with a stalled career in academia. She's an adjunct professor, doesn't really have a straightforward career path. She has two therapists, one of whom doesn't know about the other, so she's kind of cheating on one with the other therapist. She has a boyfriend who's kind of perfectly fine, and she is getting over a recent miscarriage that hasn't yet stopped bleeding. And the book kind of goes through that whole, like, it's about a month, so the time that the miscarriage takes to heal itself. What's interesting about this narrator is that she spends a lot of her time thinking. So analyzing and overanalyzing and just forming ideas about herself and her surroundings and the people around her. So it's just, really inside her head. The novel really tries to confront the collision between our super active minds. I think as readers, we have really active minds, and the real activity of living. So the physical space of, being in the world around you. It's wry and funny and obviously really smart. So again, if you like Rachel Cusk, which I clearly do, as this is the second time I mentioned her, or Jenny Awful, then I think you'll like this as well. I will also say that I love novels that reinforce the essential privacy of, being a human. That makes sense. I think we all recognize that there are certain parts of ourselves that can't be adequately shared, and that there's always a certain unknowability, even to the people that we love the most. And this novel is very tender and graceful in its treatment of that fact. The narrator, I think, keeps parts of herself private in a way that balances herself against the various tides in her life. So sometimes privacy obviously needs to rupture in a way, and I think that tension is very central to this book. So again, really smart writing, really, dryly funny. I would definitely recommend it. Okay. My third novel I'm going to talk about that has more plot than the other two is called Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I read this earlier this year and I absolutely loved it. I think the paperback of this is also coming out early October, October 5th, for anyone who wants to wait for the paperback. So this is a really great character, plot-driven novel that explores deeper topics like gender and parenthood and love. Our first main character is named Reese, and she's a trans woman living in New York City. She's currently in a casual relationship with a married man, which is a way of avoiding being hurt because her last relationship really hurt like hell. Her previous girlfriend, Amy, detransitioned and became Ames, and their entire life together was upended. Ames, our other main character, now lives as a man and has a new lover, his boss, Katrina, and their relationship hits a bump when Katrina finds herself unexpectedly pregnant. The pregnancy throws Ames into an existential crisis. What can fatherhood mean for him when he's not even sure of his maleness? So his solution, the only solution that feels tenable for him, is to involve Reese, the woman who showed him what it was to be a woman, and the woman who showed him what it was to have a family. Ames, Reese, and Katrina collide and try to make sense of this complex situation, which involves navigating the loaded areas of gender, sexuality, and motherhood. So it's an excellent contemporary novel that is really fresh and funny and full of life. These characters really breathe and come off the page. Really great, really great. The next one I'm going to talk about is Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. I don't know if any of you read her previous novel called A Separation, which I also loved. These both have the common aspect of they're both pretty psychological and almost thriller-esque, even though like no real tragedy or anything happens in them. She has an excellent way of creating dread and tension through language. If you've ever read Elena Ferrante's Days of Abandonment, her style of writing really feels similar to that for me. It's just this really, I don't know, you just feel like so tightly wound in a good way. So this book follows our narrator, who is a woman who has recently moved to The Hague to work at the International Court of Justice as a translator. And she is a translator for all sorts of things, including the war criminals brought before the court. So there's that element. There's also a more personal element. She's involved with a man who's married. Common thread in my books, it seems. And his wife has left him, but there is an element of, you know, unknowability to what his deal is. Her best friend in the city, Yana, it begins with her witnessing or being near some sort of murder or tragedy. You don't know exactly what it is until later in the book. So there's all these elements of sort of dread. I mean, dread and fear and betrayal, and this woman who's trying to find a place called home and people she can love. And Katie Kitamura, I think, is really an excellent writer. I would definitely check her out if you're looking for a new writer you may not have read. It's also not a long book. So really, really good. That's all I have to say. The last book I'm going to talk about, which I'm sure most of you have heard the name, is Sally Rooney. Beautiful World, Where Are You? So I'm sorry if you're sick of hearing about Sally Rooney, but I'm going to talk about her. This book is probably, I think it's her longest of the three that she's written. And it's got a plot, which is good. We've got four main characters here. The two most important are Alice and Eileen, who are two 29-year-old women who have been friends since college. They're sort of aging out of their, I mean, obviously not youthfulness, but like the freshness of youth, and they're trying to figure out like what that means for the rest of their lives, where they're going, what they're doing, where they're going to find meaning. Alice is a writer who's found a bit of fame and fortune, very similar to our dear Sally Rooney. And she has also recently suffered a breakdown from which she's recuperating in a very large, drafty rectory in a small city by the sea. There she meets Felix, who is a warehouse worker, and he's very saucy and spiky and calls her on her crap, which is good. But Eileen is our other young woman working at a literary agency in Dublin. It's sort of a meaningless job, and she's a little depressed and lonely and listless, and also yearning for her childhood friend Simon, who is a Catholic political consultant who is very attractive and always has a new younger girlfriend. So they're all a little bit tortured and angsty, but also it's good. It's all good. The chapters alternate between the perspectives of Alice and Eileen and these emails that they write each other. And I just want to emphasize how much I loved the emails they wrote to each other. It's probably my favorite part of the book. They're really beautiful and deep, and the two women riff on so many topics, from the obvious ones like sex and romance to somewhat haughtier topics like contemporary capitalism and fame, consumerism, literature, art, the collapse of civilization, identity politics, etc. The letters are kind of like one mind arguing with itself, which is, you know, probably Sally Rooney's mind, but I loved being inside that mind. It was so interesting and thought-provoking. So the book's plot really answers a question posed in one of the emails: what role, if any, can art and beauty play in today's world when so many horrible crises confront humanity? Do we always come back to small little narratives about love and sex, even as the world collapses around us? And these characters, which are so rich and alive, play out a story that is small in scale, but that teems with curiosity, depth, and thought. So, and those are my books. I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Fantastic as always. A few notes. I forgot to mention, I put it in the chat, but the camera on the computer in the office in Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location cannot be made to face the correct way so that you can read covers in the right way. And we are really sorry about that. And we're going to fix it eventually, but we couldn't quite do it since the last Bookseller book chat. So sorry about that. Next up, we have the wonderful Cassidy Washburn from our Saratoga Springs location. She's also one of our magnificent team of web booksellers. Takes care of all of your web orders. She's the person behind the algorithms that other places don't. All right, Cassidy, why don't you tell us about what you've been reading?
All right. Hi. I hope you all can hear me just fine. I had a bit of technical difficulties beforehand, but let's get into it. So the first one I want to discuss is called The Last Watch by J.S. Dews. This is an adult science fiction novel that follows a group called the Sentinels. They're pretty much the dregs of society. They are sent out to the edge of the universe called the Divide to watch over it and protect it. However, the Divide starts to collapse, and it is up to the Sentinels to pretty much save the universe. So basically, the dregs of society are going to be saving the universe, and I don't know if we all want that, but that's going to be what is happening in this novel. I thought The Last Watch is a immensely readable work of science fiction. It is something that won't make you feel dumb if you don't read a lot of science fiction. There's not a lot of like sciencey terms. It's pretty easy to understand. It's really imaginative and fast paced, and there's a ton of characters in it that you will just fall in love with. It is a dual perspective, so you're going to get two POVs in it. If you like multiple POVs, that's what you're getting. This is perfect for fans of the Expanse series. The first one being Leviathan Wakes. That is also a show. I don't remember what network it's on, but if you like that show that's in the novel, this is pretty much very similar to it and perfect for fans of that. So if you're looking for a really good readable science fiction novel, I would start with this, especially if you want to get into sci-fi. This is a good place to start. So that's the first one. And then the next one I'm going to talk about is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. You might be familiar with this author because he is the author of The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is one of my all-time favorite books. So I was very excited to read this one. This follows Wallace, who is a very selfish, egotistical, arrogant lawyer who dies in the very beginning of the book. And he is taken to a tea shop by a Grim Reaper. There he meets Hugo, who is a ferryman who is meant to help Wallace cross over and accept his death. Wallace is not ready to cross over, as you can imagine, especially because he starts to realize that he never really truly lived to begin with. It's a lighthearted fantasy, but it does feature really tough topics such as death and grief and dealing with the 5 stages of grief, especially coming from the person who died in it. I've seen some people describe Wallace as a Scrooge type character because he's very, very unlikable in the beginning. He fires a woman right in the beginning, even though she was just like pouring her heart out to him. He's not a great guy, but he goes on this journey of self-discovery and is better for it in the end. So this is just right up there with House in the Cerulean Sea. TJ Klune never fails to amaze me. I think this is really well done. So that's Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. Next, I almost dropped my book. Next, we're going to talk about a perfect one for October and Halloween season. That is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This is pretty much a classic slasher film put into book format. So if that's kind of your favorite genre of movie, you're going to want to read this book. So it follows a support group for survivors of horrific murders and attacks and tragedies and things like that. One day, one of those girls does not show up to the support group meeting, and they find out that she has been killed. And we soon realize that somebody is targeting this group and going after our final girls. This was brilliantly paced with twists around every corner. Like I said, it is perfect for the Halloween spooky season. It does have those exaggerated scenarios that you see in those horror movies, but if that's what you're interested in, you're gonna love this book. It is a very thrilling read, and it does incorporate humor into it. So it does kind of lighten the mood a bit on that. You'll find yourself laughing out loud, and the characters may not be the most likable, but they are pretty darn funny. Let's see. But yeah, if you ever wondered what happened to the survivors of those movies, this is the answer. So it's another Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. And then we have Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is her latest novel. She is the author of Mexican Gothic. If you liked that book, you'll like this one. However, this one doesn't have that little or fantasy twist in it. This is a historical crime noir novel set in the 1970s in Mexico City. It follows a woman named Maite. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but she is a quiet secretary who is pulled into this mystery behind her next door neighbor, Leonora's disappearance. This is another dual perspective narrative. You are also following a man named Elvis, who is a criminal hired to find Leonora, and his search ends up entangled with Maite's. They are both searching for her, and neither one of them knows each other, but their journeys become crossed there. Silvia Moreno Garcia has a way of making a complicated plot easy to understand and very, very enjoyable. A lot of her characters are flawed, but very memorable at the same time. They all have their own quirks. Maite likes to read romance comics, and Elvis is a criminal who hates violence and loves rock and roll. So he's a fun character for sure. This novel actually drew inspiration from real life events, the political turmoil and student riots in Mexico in the 1970s. Silvia Moreno Garcia actually described this book as pulp fiction, but based on a real horror story. So if you're looking for that little historical element, like true historical element with a touch of mystery, this is a noir. So this would be perfect for you. There is quite a little bit of violence in it because it is like the riots and things like that are in this, but it's perfect for people who are looking for those little touches of other genres. So that's Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Next, we're gonna talk about a giant beast of a novel. It is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. This is like I said, a giant book. It pulls you headfirst into a world filled with murderous vampires and their saintly slayers. It chronicles the life of one of those slayers. His name is Gabriel de Leon. He is the last of the Silver Saints, and he has been captured by a vampire. And this vampire basically wants him to chronicle his life journey from childhood to adulthood. There's plenty of bloody fight scenes and gory details in this, so it's definitely not for the faint of heart, and it is super dark and gritty, but honestly, it's a masterpiece of a novel. There are full-page illustrations in this edition as well, so it really adds to the story. The interviewer is the one that's illustrating these, so basically one of the characters is illustrating this book. So this is the life journey of Gabriel de Leon. This is honestly perfect for fans of Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind, which also is one of those tales of a journey of one such character from childhood to adulthood, sometimes going into way too much detail, but very, very, very entertaining. Lots of good fight scenes, a really good epic fantasy novel. If you're looking for a new fantasy world to get into, I would definitely highly recommend this one. It is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. Then the next one is another fantasy novel, but it doesn't have a lot of magic in it, so don't be deterred by it. It is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is probably one of my favorite books of the year so far. When I finished reading it, I kind of wondered to myself how I was going to put my love of this novel into words, into a review, just because I loved it so much. It is a politically driven alternate history about the rise of the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty. It follows a young woman who you never learn her original name. She was destined for nothingness. Her father brought her and her brother to a prophet, basically, and he basically said that she was meant for nothing, and her brother was destined for greatness. But then her brother dies, and she ends up taking her brother's name and becomes a monk. So there's that element of Mulan in there. She disguises herself as a boy and grows up as a man. She soon realizes that maybe her brother's name isn't the only thing she could take. Maybe she can take his destiny as well and become great. It follows a bunch of morally gray characters. I think this is one of those books that I read the most morally gray characters in it before. They make very questionable choices, and none of them are necessarily good. You don't really know who to root for. A lot of their actions and the relationships with each other really had me constantly turning the page and wanting to see what was next. This is also a very bold voice for the LGBTQ plus community. So there is really good representation in this, and I think it was a really good alternate history, very entertaining, very fast-paced. So that was She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And then the final book I'm going to talk about is a YA novel for all of those people out there who are looking for some young adult literature. This is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. Beautiful cover, I love it. This is a beautiful novel about family and magic and sacrifice. It is a whimsical story about a young woman who has forbidden magic in her and the stepmother who ends up betraying her. The stepmother places a curse on her and her brothers, and she ends up being separated from them. So it is about this young woman, Shiori's journey to find her lost brothers and to save her father's throne and her empire from a dangerous threat that may or may not involve this stepmother. While reading this, I couldn't help but feel as though I was reading a traditional folklore or folktale story. It was a novel that was fraught with danger and adventure, but had like a good underlying message to it. It felt comforting, even though they were faced with all these challenges and danger around every corner. This is actually a retelling of Hans Christian Andersen's The Wild Swans. So if you're looking for like a fairy tale retelling, you will find the perfect one in Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. So that was it. Those are all my books.
Thank you so much, Cassidy. That was fantastic. That's great. One left. The next bookseller we've got is Parker Goodro. They are a mostly children's bookseller at our Northshire, Manchester location. They're relatively new too, and just making a great fit. Parker, why don't you tell us about some of the books you've been reading?
All right. So I do have mostly children's books today. I'm going to start with my one adult book. That is The Human Zoo by Sabina Murray. It's about a journalist. Her name is Ting. She is Filipino-American, and she's sort of going back to the Philippines to escape from having to think about her divorce. It's very deeply involved in her family. All of her aunts are very sweet and want to take care of her, even though she is a middle-aged woman. It's very much concerned with the personal side of politics. Not just who you vote for, but what you value, what you want out of life, and what you're willing to do, even if it's a little bit shady, in order to get that. It's called The Human Zoo because Ting is researching a book about a indigenous Filipino tribe that was taken to America to be part of the human zoo. And you sort of get the sense throughout the novel that a lot of the politics and racial tension that exists for Ting as a Filipino American, and just within the Philippines and the government regime that is not respecting the lives of the people, is very much about depersonalization and what it means to like actually be a person with control of your life. It has a fun little like sort of genre shift where part of Ting's family obligations forces her to show around a distant cousin who then gets into some shady political business, and it becomes a little bit of a thriller right at the end. It's quite fun. Obviously we have the physical book here, but there's also a fantastic audiobook, and you can support Northshire Bookstore with buying the audiobook through Libro FM. So that is that. The Human Zoo, once more, by Sabina Murray. And then this is a young adult novel, Pet, by Accursed Vampire. It's a utopian fantasy. If you've had any teens in your life who are really into dystopia, this is kind of a fun twist on that. The main character, Jam, is a trans girl. She believes her community is perfect. Everyone in it cares about everyone else. It's a very community-driven, positive, Black, queer environment. But one of her mother's paintings has come to life and told her that there is a monster in her community, and it's her job to help this piece of art come to life, save someone in her community who is in danger. It's very rooted in Black poetry and ideas about community and protecting each other. I thought it was quite beautiful. It's from a couple years ago, and I wanted to highlight it today because we do have a sequel coming out next year in February called Bitter, and I'm very excited for that one. But it's really great, good for people who are interested in dystopia, good for people who are interested in getting into like Black poets, because Accursed Vampire is primarily a poet. Really, really interesting book. The next one is also young adult, is The Love Song of Ivy K. Harlow by Hannah Moskowitz. It's a young adult contemporary novel. It involves a sapphic romance, but it's not a romance novel because the main character is not one of the people in the romance. The main character has been in love with her best friend, Ivy, for their entire friendship. And she's just been waiting for that time when Ivy, who just hops from girl to girl all the time, is finally going to fall in love. But when it happens, it's with someone else. And she sort of has to watch from the outside as Ivy and Dot experience this epic love. And she's just feeling very unrequited. There's a lot of really relatable characters. There's a great big ensemble cast, mostly female, mostly lesbian, bisexual characters. The dialogue is really fun and snappy, feels like, you know, actual teenagers talking. And even though it isn't technically a romance novel, the main character really does love romance novels. So you get a lot of the same feeling of she's really looking for that great love, even though she's not sure that she's found it yet. So for teenagers who like romance novels, who are looking for lesbian romance novels, it's a little bit of a twist on it. It's something a little different. It's really cool. Next up, we've got The Wolf's Curse by Jessica Vitalis. This is coming out next Tuesday, September 21st. It is a middle grade fantasy novel. The interesting thing about this is it's set in a fantasy world. Death is the narrator, but Death is a giant wolf. And Death needs someone to take over their role and become the next wolf. And the person that she has chosen for this task is the main character, Gage. Gage does not understand the role of the wolf. His community has a lot of very involved death rituals, but they don't think the wolf has anything positive to do with death. They think it's a harbinger of death. So whenever Gage sees the wolf, he's very frightened of it, and it causes him to be ostracized by his community just because he can see it, even though he doesn't actually have any control over it. So it's very much about being an outsider, about grieving about the rituals of death and why we as a community still do them, even if we don't really believe in the ideas behind them anymore. It's very much a found family novel. After Gage's grandfather dies, he is taken in by a neighborhood girl, and they form a really fantastic friendship as they both go through the grieving process together. So this one is really nice. It's got a little bit of that like Halloween spooky stuff, but it's not at all horror. So if you've got any kids who are looking for something to get a little bit into the holiday spirit, but they're not into any of the like more scary or gory stuff, this might be a good thing to give them. That's once more The Wolf's Curse by Jessica Vitalis. Next one is The Accursed Vampire by Madeline McGrain. This is a middle grade graphic novel. The art is really cute. There's a little vampires. So it's 3 vampire children. The main one is Dragoslava, and they have been working for a witch for many years, and the witch sort of takes advantage of them and doesn't really care about their safety. So she sends them on a quest to try and find her lost grimoire, and Dragoslava is trying to decide whether they need to actually carry this out because the witch has told them that they are cursed, and if they ever disobey her, that's basically it for them. Or if protecting the family that they have found over their wanderings is more important than following what the witch tells them to do. There's some really neat fantasy elements. There's a lot of cool little details in the illustrations. My favorite thing about this is it just has a great chaotic energy. Like, morality has no place in this book. They're tiny little vampires. They run around biting people. They only care about each other, but they care about each other so much, and they're all such chaotic little individuals that it creates this very fun, energizing, just out there read. There's some really weird stuff in here. It's great. So that is, once again, The Accursed Vampire by Madeline McGrain, who got her start doing webcomics. So if you want to get a taste of what her stuff is like, you can look her up. She has got some great stuff to see. Next one is Monster Friends by Katie Van Dorn. This one is a children's graphic novel. It's appropriate for a little bit younger than the mid-child range, but I really think any kid from ages like 7 to 13 or 14 would be interested in this if it's their thing. Reggie is a little monster. He used to be an adventurer, but he's gotten a little bit scared on some of his adventures, and he's decided to retire, but he doesn't want to tell his friends that he's giving it up. And he meets Emily as he's moving back home to sort of take a break from adventuring. And she sort of draws him out of his shell where he's just feeling very sort of down on himself because he doesn't want to give it up, but he doesn't feel like he can do it anymore. And Emily is really sort of showing him that, yes, you can still have adventures. They're just adventures that you choose, that you feel good about. And it's a very gentle, sweet book. Really, really neat creatures of all sorts. Giant tigers. Reggie like grows wings a bunch of times. It's very like Miyazaki-esque. And there is a little drawing guide in the back about how to draw the various monsters. For any kid that's like artistic, likes making up their own creatures, this is a really good one to give them because it's sort of a how-to of, you got yourself some characters, you've got a basic story, you too can make an adorable graphic novel. So I really loved this one. That's once more Monster Friends by Katie Van Dorn. And then I've got 2 picture books. So let me do this one first. This is a brand new one called Beautifully Me by Nabella Noor. Size is an issue right now. Okay. It's about a Bangladeshi American girl named Zubi, who's very excited for her first day of school. But as she's getting ready, she starts to notice that her family is all being very negative about their own appearances. Her sister wants to go on a diet. Her mother is unsatisfied with the way her clothing fits. And when she goes to school, she notices other kids being teased for their weight as well. and she starts to feel like maybe she needs to go on a diet like her older sister. And of course, once her family realizes this is what she's thinking, they're horrified because to them, she's perfect. And it's a very great reminder of just thinking about the way that you refer to your own body and how that impacts other people around you. I feel a lot of fat acceptance books are very much like, this character is bullied and they're unhappy with their body and they want to change, but they don't need to change because they're perfect. And this one is very much more about, I see that people around me feel this way about themselves. And that is upsetting no matter how you feel about yourself. Even if you feel very confident, that can be enough to set you back, even if no one says anything directly to you. So I feel like this would have been a good reminder for some parents that I knew about appropriate things to say about yourself around your children. I think the representation is really beautiful. The illustrations are very, very cute. Just a lovely book, a great introduction to the political concept of fat acceptance in a child-appropriate way. And then this is the last one, sort of seasonally appropriate send-off, Van Penguin by Lucy Ruth Cummins. This is sort of a Halloween-themed book, but it doesn't have anything to do with Halloween, so you can read it all year round. A family of vampires goes to the zoo, but when they visit the penguins, their youngest child slips into the penguin exhibit, and a penguin slips out and takes the child's place. So the vampire family goes all the way through the zoo with a penguin with them, and the little vampire just hangs out with the penguins all day. The really fun thing about this is that it's sort of full of dramatic irony. The pictures are telling half of the story while the prose is just going on very blandly of, then the vampire family went to do this and then they went to do that. But all of the animals that they're going to see are pointing at the penguin like, what are you doing there? And none of the vampire family is noticing. It's a great introduction to like how pictures can tell half of the story and even contradict the words, so that as you're learning to like visually read stories as well as understand the words, it's like a separate skill that you can learn through this book in the way that it sort of contradicts itself in a humorous way. Just really sweet, cute little illustrations. It's a really fun book for this time of year and all year round. That's once again Van Penguin by Lucy Ruth Cummins. And that is it for me.
Thank you so much, Parker. That was fantastic. I know that I've got at least 3 books there that I need to buy for a couple different people. My 10-year-old and someone else as well. That's the problem with these bookseller book chats. You've just got, if we were made of money, we'd find more and more things. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This has been a great fun evening. I'm going to put once again the list for the blog post here where you can find all of the titles that have been recommended tonight. Likewise, you can find it as a permanent link on northshire.com if you go to the notes from the Shire. Thank you all so much. We'll see you at another Northshire Presents virtual event soon. And have a great weekend. Take care, everybody.